The first part of my Schranz tutorial seems to be doing good. Considering lack of such videos in English, no wonder you would like to learn more production techniques for this genre. Today I made for you another guide. With this one I will teach you how to create Techno Percussion on top of a kick drum with only Ableton effects and samples. Step 1 is to pick the right samples. I encourage you to choose various sounds. Some of the percussion samples will create a rhythm. This applies to short hi-hats and shakers. Some of the samples will fill the background. For that, I will use ride or crash samples. And for more variety, a few claps or snare drums will come in handy too. If you want to get your desired sound a bit faster, play around with some loops. As you see, you don't have to spend hours browsing sample libraries. I picked 4 samples of each type, and that gives me 20 sounds to sequence. That's more than enough. Let's create the drum pattern. I find it easier to start with longer samples because it gives you the taste of what your track might sound like faster. I will work with simple crash samples and loops first, and then I will enhance the rhythm with short samples. Both splash and tambourine loop fill higher frequency areas. Fill in the beat with snare drums that occupy mid-frequencies will make the beat fuller. That's why I recommended picking various samples. It's up to you what kind of rhythm you create. To make mine more interesting, I place some of the samples off beat. At last, I enhance the groove with short hi-hats and shakers. With every kind of sample you can try layering, that is playing simultaneously more than a single sample. So, I add a single hi-hat and a single shaker. And then, on top of them, I add more samples. Once I have my drum pattern, I head to the drum rack to process individual samples. I can trim the sample by either cutting the beginning of it or by making it shorter. To make the sample sound softer, I can add a fade-in. A fade-out can make the sample disappear more smoothly if it ends playing in a certain way. Probably the best thing to try is pitch adjustment. I can change the way how Ableton affects the pitch of the sound by using warping. Let's try a few warping modes available. What's worth noting is that warping synchronizes as well the sample to your project BPM. You might find that useful when working with loops. At last, you can adjust the volume of each sample to blend them better. This is the percussion before all the adjustments. And this is the sound after tweaking the samples. Step 2 is to melt the percussion with a limiter. Some compression is necessary to push the percussion in front of our already fat kick sound. Our goal is to make all the peaks quieter and to even out the volume of the whole percussion in time. The easiest way to achieve that is by using a limiter. Ableton's limiter is simple to use. To start compressing the sound, you can either make it louder with the gain control, or you can bring down the ceiling, also called the threshold in other plugins. The amount of compression, also known as the gain reduction, is shown on the bottom right section. I recommend using both gain and ceiling controls for compression to avoid making the output too loud in relation to the sound without limiting. There are two more controls that set the limiter's behavior. The look ahead can be treated as an attack control in the compressor. The lower the look ahead, the faster the limiter reacts to incoming peaks, resulting in even more flat and compressed sound. The release, simply put, tells how fast the compressor returns to its initial state after compressing the peak. Our percussion consists of numerous peaks, so we would like our limiter to work like this. We encounter the first peak that is brought down quickly and aggressively, and once it's done, the limiter quickly stops reducing the volume and waits for another peak. To make the limiter work just like that, we need to set the release to something low. Apparently, this is automatically done with the auto release switch turned on. Despite using both ceiling and gain controls, the output still seems to be a bit louder than the input. To judge the compression better, I will fine-tune the output volume by using a separate utility, along with a perceived loudness meter. You can use, for example, a MV meter plugin, a simple VU meter. Compensating the volume difference with a peak meter in Ableton is in this case useless. Step 3 is to distort the percussion to make it crunchy. Ableton has quite a lot of distortion effects, but not all of them will be suitable. Unlike with the kick drum distortion earlier, we don't need aggressive effects like amp or overdrive. We also don't want to make the percussion muffled, and that's what we get if we use cabinet or drum bass. So, let me show you a proven combination for crunchy hi-hats. At first, we will use a bit crusher. With Redux, we can either achieve a lo-fi effect by using the rate control and add noise by reducing bit depth. And this is much better. The effects of both downsampling and beat depth reducement can be fine-tuned with jitter and shape controls respectively. This effect has to be blended using the dry-wet control so the noise doesn't overpower the sound. Alright, we have the noise that makes the percussion more filthy, but what about the crunch? After Redux, it's time to use the dynamic tube. This effect can add lots of crackle while being relatively transparent. I will start as always with picking the distortion style. That is done with the APC switch. To hear the subtle differences between these three tube models, I will turn up the distortion first, with both drive and bias knobs. And now I can adjust the amount of tube distortion applied. It's mainly done with the bias knob, but the drive knob also has some importance. From my experience, I recommend turning up the drive all the way up at first, and then, if you need more distortion, turn up the bias. The tone knob tells whether the distortion has to emphasize low or high frequencies. At last, blend the effect with dry wet knob and compensate any difference in volume with the output. Step 4 is to equalize the percussion. For sure, such amount of compressed and distorted hi-hats and shakers will give lots of noisy frequencies that will make the track sound annoying. Besides making sure that the low end coming from the percussion doesn't overlap with the low end from the kick drum, that's the only purpose of equalization of percussion. I will start by equalizing roughly the whole percussion channel. The first filter will be a high-pass filter that cuts the lowest frequencies. Setting this one is quite easy. Just turn up the cut-off control until you notice the sound is getting lighter. The high-end cut is more tricky. How to know how many high frequencies you should remove? I can use the same approach that I used in my latest equalization and mixing tutorial. I load a few Schranz tracks that I find sounding good, and by comparing the difference in the frequency balance by both ear and eye, I find the best place for a low-pass filter. A filter set up like this cuts unnecessary air and makes the percussion sound more pleasant. Okay, but between 70 Hz and 12.5K, there are many more areas that might have to be boosted or attenuated. To take care of them, most of the times I will be using bell filters. I take such a filter, set up a high Q with high attenuation, and play the percussion while sweeping the frequency control. I do that until I notice the percussion sounds more similar to the percussion in my reference tracks. This requires comparing your beat to the reference quite often, but that's a part of the learning process. When I find a decent spot for a filter, that's the moment when I fine-tune the frequency, gain and Q parameters. Once I'm done with all frequency cuts, I do the same thing but with boosting the frequencies. Besides equalizing the whole percussion channel, I can be more precise and equalize individual samples as well. Filter by filter, step by step, I clean the sound from annoying parts and enhance the good ones. Step 5 is to use volume automation. Our percussion sound is polished and what we need to do is to just make it work with the kick drum better. Currently, when we play the beat, the hi-hats cover the kick drum in the beginning and we can feel the hi-hats are just thrown on top of the kick. A classic thing to do is to make the hi-hats become quieter for a while whenever the kick drum hits. I need two effects. The first one can be anything with a volume control, and the utility gives me just that. The second effect is the shaper. This effect is a kind of flexible LFO that can be applied to almost anything. I will click the map button and assign the modulation to the gain knob in the utility. We see that the volume changes from plus 36 decibels to minus infinity. I just need to make the percussion quieter, so let's adjust the upper modulation limit. Now in the window, I will draw a sidechain modulation curve. I increase the grid size, double-click the area to add points, and click any point with right shift key held to remove it. At last, I make the volume automation more transparent by turning up the bottom modulation limit.